Good afternoon. My name is Jim Conlan and welcome to the latest episode of our sports show. As you know, on part three, each week we preview football, and football is the main team. And especially this evening, coming out for our broadcast, it is January transfer deadline day, where all the moves, the big moves and the shakers happen in the Premier League, whether it's the race at the top or in terms of the Premier League title, whether it's the chasing pack in terms of European football, or whether it's the dreaded fight below at the bottom of the graveyard, as they say, in terms of trying to save Premier League status. And no doubt about it, we're delighted to be joined by a popular guest this evening, and he knows all too well about competing in the Premier League in terms of the challenges that it brings. He was the Hull City manager during his time. He's obviously competed in terms of the January and summer transfer markets during his day, the one and only Phil Brown. And Phil, first of all, January transfer market, is it one of those sort of days with your memories of your time being a manager that you're sitting in that office on that day waiting for calls to be made, or waiting for a secretary, a chairman to enlighten you whether a bid's gone through? Are you ever off on that day? Are you constantly on mode, switched on mode until that deadline day window shuts? Because is there a period where something that you mightn't have facilitated, you might have been open to taking a bid for a player, say at 2:00, but come 7:00, you might say, yeah, we'll listen to that offer now?
It's thanks very much for the invite, Jim, to speak about these experiences first and foremost. I've been involved in the game now nearly 42 years, and when I think back to these deadline days, back in the day there used to be the third Thursday in March before the window closed then, so it was an open transfer forum all season. When they introduced the January transfer window, and then the second window was in the summer, obviously, I wasn't in favour of it, to tell you the truth. I wasn't quite a believer in it, but at the same time, it made you do your homework. It made you do your preparation. It made you, certainly where chief scouts were concerned, and they're probably a thing of the past as well. I think where chief scouts were concerned, we had one of the best at Bolton Wanderers, and I took him to Derby County with me. I took him to Hull City with me, and he's still working. He's still working in the scouting industry as at the under-21s at Notts Forest. And I won't embarrass him by telling you his name, but he was just one of the guys that would go to maybe 5 or 6 games every week, and you had to do match reports. You had to do what he used to call one-liners. So you'd go and watch a game of football, you'd see 22 players, you had to do one line on them 22 players, and quite often maybe 21 of them weren't good enough, but there'd be one little gem, and then you had to do a report on that little gem, and it was an ABCD system, which sounds antiquated, but I tell you what, we carried it through right the way through to my career working with Sam Allardyce as an assistant manager at Bolton Wanderers, where I was quite simply learning my trade. And then when I went on my own to Derby County and then to Hull City, and the rest's history, as it were, I took all the information with me, match reports. So you had dossiers on all the players in England. But then all of a sudden, I would have said probably 20 years ago, the European market opened up, and we had to go further afield. So we started having European scouts. We'd make sure that they were based in Spain for sure, in Italy and places like that. But it became such a network that when it comes to that third Thursday in March, or more importantly now, the 31st of January, if we hadn't had our work done by the 31st of January, we thought we had failed. We thought that we had failed the club, or the club had failed in the transfer market, and that we hadn't done our business in time. And if you go back to some of the great transfer deadline days, I used to love them. I really did. I mean, when I first started off at Blackpool, we had Billy Bingham as a director of football, myself, Sam Allardyce, and we had sort of 2 telephones each And when they ran out, the batteries ran out, that was it. It was gone. It was an old day if you couldn't recharge your phones and stuff like that. So moving forward with the game and obviously technology, I think the bigger clubs now, their networks are just so vast, and the money side of things is so vast with regards to them, that you're not really, certain clubs in the Premier League are not really competing with the Manchester Cities, the Liverpools, the Man Uniteds, the clubs at the top. And I've looked across some of the clubs, and I think it's quite interesting to see the likes of Brentford not doing anything. Now, whether they've done something today, you can inform me on that one, but the likes of Brentford not doing something. And I'm going back to the owner of Brentford being quite an astute man when it comes down to the transfer market. There's certain clubs like Brighton, for instance, are making a lot of money in the transfer market. They're bringing players in for next to nothing and selling them on for quite a packet. But when you think about that, profit-making organisation then has to replace. So the ones who have done an awful lot of transfer activity in the January window are the ones that are probably, between you and I, Jim, are in trouble. And I've looked at the Premier League. I've studied the Premier League. You know, I've been across here for 3 months in India, and I've got a couple of months more. And I try to keep in touch with everything that I possibly can. But it's very, very difficult. But I must admit, I looked at the Premier League, and there's certain clubs at the start of the season you wouldn't have them in the positions that they are. Newcastle being one of them, you know, at the top. Spurs had a tremendous start to the season, and they're just dropping off and falling away to a certain extent. You know, you've got the likes of Fulham, you've got Brentford. Who would have thought they were going to be in the top 10, ahead of Chelsea and ahead of Liverpool? Brighton having a fabulous season. It's unbelievable. But there's a pack at the bottom, and you can talk about the bottom 6 or even 7, Jim. The pack at the bottom, there's been 1 or 2 signs of panic buys, 1 or 2 signs of, you know, they're just flooding the area, trying to get as many players as they possibly can on the training ground, so the manager's got as many options as he can have. But at the same time, that's not just the answer. You know, the answer is the manager, by 19, 20 games, halfway through a season, should know as near as damn it his best 9, definitely 10, if not 11 players at the football club. And then you flood it with another 6 or 7. All of a sudden, you're almost taking the manager back to the start and saying, well, these players may be better than the ones that you've got. So you've then got to work it out again. So the January transfer window can be an absolute minefield for managers, but it can also be a godsend for 1 or 2 that are in trouble.
Yeah, and Phil, if I can start off by talking about the current leaders, Arsenal. And it seems by their business, it's all about experience for Arsenal so far, with Trossard, proven Premier League player, 28 years old, coming off a great season with Brighton. Now almost like Jorginho in the door as well, World Cup winner with Italy as well, Champions League winner with Chelsea, 32 years. A proven sort of player in terms of the Premier League. So Mikel Arteta, he's almost going for, he has that young core, he's developed that young core, he knows he's probably 4 months away from a Premier League title, the first for Arsenal in 20 years. It's all about experience now, getting the right experienced characters in the dressing room. That seems to be Arsenal's ply in terms of getting leadership into the locker room in general.
Well, I've got to say, I've been very, very impressed with Arteta, and more importantly, I've been impressed with Arsenal holding on to Arteta. And what I mean by that is he did have a little bit of a sticky start to his career. He left, you know, he was under the wing of Pep Guardiola for long enough, and he decided to fly himself. And I've watched that with great interest, I've got to say, Jim. And I think he's doing a fabulous job. But it's quite shrewd what he's done. You know, you're talking about the youthful exuberance of Arsenal. Some of the players that they've got are fabulous, and they're really putting a brand of football on the field of play that nobody can say that they don't admire it. You know, I think you're taking on Arsenal at your peril. Manchester United, they beat them 3-2 recently, and it was a fabulous game of football. But United got to the equaliser, and I thought Ten Hag appointed Arsenal. You know, even the great Manchester United would have accepted the point in hindsight, but they kept on going and kept on going. And I think it was Trossard that came off the bench that day and created more issues and more problems in the final third. I don't know whether they've got Caicedo.
No, it's not going to go ahead. It's not going to go ahead.
It's not going to go ahead. I thought that there was going to be a problem there because it went from 50 to 60, 60 to 70 too quickly for me. And I thought, Brighton, are they going to hang on to this kid, or are they going to price themselves out of the market? They're brilliant in the market in terms of, making money. The owners I've known very well. Brian Horton used to work for them, my assistant manager at Hull City. And he really speaks highly of the way Brighton is run, and it's proven that they're doing the business in the right manner. And if they want more than 70 million for Caicedo, and they've said to the great Arsenal, no, you can't have him. Well, it's good business, isn't it? If they can get rid of him at the end of the season for 100 million. But I think Arsenal have, I go back to the point what you made about experience. I didn't think they had a spine of experienced players, and they're now halfway through the season with 20 games gone or 19 games gone, and they've got 50 points. It's a fantastic return. But as Alex used to always say, squeaky bum time, it comes at any stage in that final run-in, and that could be halfway mark. It could be, they could lose one or two players to suspension. They could lose one or two key players to injury. And if they haven't got replacements for them, then the experience will tell eventually, because young lads tend to look round, and if they can't see the performances coming like they were at the start of the season, where everybody's nice and fresh and you've had a pre-season and nobody's expecting you flying under the radar, it's a little bit stealthily done by Arsenal, but the business end is never stealthy. The business end is always out there in your face, and you've got to be able to handle the pressure. So you've got to say that Arsenal's business of bringing experience is exceptional.
And would you like to be in Graham Potter's position now at Chelsea, and in terms of the dressing room is being flooded with players coming in? You've Felix coming in, you've Mudryk coming in. It looks like more than likely now Enzo Fernandez is going to come in the door as well to go with Batshuayi, and looks like Ziyech is going to leave. It looks like Tubbs aren't going to meet the requirements Chelsea wants for Conor Gallagher either. So there looks like there's going to be an overflow of players there. And I'm just looking there, you have a proven player like Raheem Sterling, and you're just wondering, is he going to get in the team for Chelsea for the remainder of the season, given all the options now? And has that move for Raheem backfired in a big way?
Well, it's a great question, because Raheem Sterling went to Chelsea, and I thought it was a major surprise when he did go. But obviously, he thought, he's a strong-willed man. You can tell the way he does his activity, as it were, either on the pitch or off the pitch. He seems to be outspoken. He seems to know exactly what he wants, and it hasn't really worked for him at Chelsea. And I don't think it's worked for Graham Potter at the moment. But it has to be said, I think the biggest thing at Chelsea is the fact that Abramovich had to leave the club and sell up, and they haven't really got over that. They might have got over it financially. Don't get me wrong. The guy that's come in has got plenty of money, and he's shown that in the transfer window. But he's brought a manager in, a young prospect from Brighton and Hove Albion, and obviously Graham Potter didn't think he could turn the chance down of managing one of the top 5 or 6 clubs in England without a shadow of a doubt. But he's come in such a transitional period for Chelsea, and that is proven now in the transfer window, with 5 or 6 new players coming in and finishing, in the top 4. They've got to be aiming the same as what Liverpool have. They've still got to have a strong second half to the season to try and get anywhere near that Champions League place, if not Europa. But to be 10th at this moment in time, and to be losing games the way they're losing games, and I've got to say it, I do rate Graham Potter very, very highly, and I'm hoping it's going to be a stepping stone. And it's a sticky moment for him at the moment, but bringing all these players in, I'm hoping they're going to have a strong second half of the season. Just the fact that he's an English manager, and I want to see, even if it's a third of the Premier League have got English managers, you want to see them do well. British managers I'm talking about, you can still include great, Brendan Rodgers involved in that as well. And Davy Moyes is Scottish. I think the local managers, for the product of management, from a worldwide perspective, have to do well in the Premier League. And I think Graham's flying the flag, but Chelsea need to have a strong second half to the season with these new players.
And just bring you on now, obviously the world's richest club, but it's intriguing how Newcastle are going about their business with Eddie Howe, because Eddie Howe is obviously picking out players he likes in terms of his dealings. He's very much in charge. There doesn't seem to be anyone controlling Eddie's decisions. You can see the players that he's been linked to: James Maddison, linked to Gallagher. He could obviously pursue players for 50, 60 million from Serie A, from Bundesliga, but it's very much Eddie Howe is going after the players that he wants in his dressing room. It's not reputations for Eddie. It seems to be he's an idea of what he wants, and he'll pursue that player. That seems to be very evident by their transfer strategy so far.
I think it's well spotted, to tell you the truth, Jim. I think I've got to say it. I mean, I'm from the northeast. Sunderland's my club. To see Newcastle doing well, honestly, I don't regret seeing them do well. I want to see the northeast football come back. Middlesbrough doing well, Sunderland doing well, Newcastle doing well, but they're flying an unbelievable flag. And I thought bringing Eddie Howe to the club was a big move, first and foremost, and then to be backed in the transfer window is down to one thing and one thing only: the fact that they are third top. I think it's fabulous for the game. The fact that Arsenal's top is fabulous for the game. Man City winning it year in, year out wouldn't really do the Premier League any good, I don't think. And to see one or two doing well, and I've mentioned already, the likes of Fulham, Brighton and Brentford being in the top half of the division, but for Newcastle to be third is outstanding. I think Eddie Howe's doing a great job. He's like you just made reference to, he can go out. It's like every day is Christmas. He can go out and buy 50, 60, 70 million players until they come off, they're falling off the trees. But he's not. He's doing it shrewdly. I think he's trying to bring in a hardcore of what he knows on the field of play. And to let Chris Wood go and John Joe Shelvey to Notts Forest, again, is another sign for me that they weren't getting regular football. They're English lads. They're plying their trade in the Premier League, and they have done. They're both very, very good players. But to let them go, I think, is a probable telltale sign that there may have been down the line a problem for Eddie Howe. So he's let them go to play football elsewhere. And they're going to go to Notts Forest, and my word, if it is Notts Forest, and you can correct me if I'm wrong there,
that's correct,
Jim. Yeah, so if it is Notts Forest, you're looking at what they brought in at the start of the season with 21, 22 players. And already, they're looking at 5, 6, 7 players in terms of movement in and out. But with proven track records in the Premier League as well. So the Notts Forest manager, Steve Cooper, who I've watched with great interest, and is he in charge of his club? Is he in charge of the income of them players? And it doesn't look as if he has too much say in the matter. Having said that, he's getting a Christmas present every day if he wants it, because they're bringing these players in, and he's working on the training ground with some quality players. So he's just got to pick his right 11. And I thought at the start of the season, it probably took him 10, 12 games to find out what his best 11 was. But he's got somewhere near that now, and he's starting to get a little bit of consistency, which is proving to me that he's a good coach and he's a good man manager. But going back to Eddie Howe, I just think you're right in what you say. The movement in the transfer window could have been a statement of intent to bring in £300 million worth of players and try and win the Premier League. I think Eddie's going step by step. If they get into the Champions League, that is a great box to tick. If they get Europa, that's a great box to tick. If they can get to the final of a competition, first time since 1955 or whatever it is, if they can get to the final, which obviously they're playing Southampton tonight, or is it tomorrow night? And there's every chance to get into the final. If they can win a trophy, my word, the place, I mean, it's already 52,000. The place, they'll just build it again. They'll level up the stadium, and they'll build a 70,000-seater stadium, and they'll fill it. So Eddie Howe's in the right place at the right time for me, and it's great to see an English manager, like I say, knocking at the door of the top 4.
And Phil, if you were a Tottenham fan, would you be disillusioned now? It looks very much like that Antonio Conte is not getting the backing by the board in terms of what he wants to do in January. And there's skepticism whether he'll be there in the summer. He looks like a disillusioned sort of man. He looks like that he feels maybe the promises have been broken. Tottenham seem to be hesitant whether to back him in this window as sort of such, because it almost looks like Conte is crying out for an extra reinforcement, but Tottenham are sort of wary. They're only a right back coming in, a right back going out with Doherty going to Atletico Madrid. One would have expected there would have been further movement with Tottenham, given the race it is for Champions League. And are they going to suffer because of it?
I think they might suffer because of it. I really do. And I'm a Conte fan. I like his style. he's took a, for me, it's a very, very ballsy move, brave move, trying to take on Daniel Levy. This guy, for me, he runs the business like a business. He runs the club like a business, shall I say. They're a wealthy club. There's no doubt in my mind they're a wealthy club. It's great to see the new stadium. I went to see Newcastle actually play before I came to India. And I've seen Spurs against Newcastle, and I witnessed the Newcastle win, and the home fans turned a wee bit, and I'm thinking, what's Antonio Conte going to come out and say now? Is he going to have another go at Daniel Levy? And it's really difficult, because once you've made your bed, and that is a strong bed to make, you're going against the owners, you're going against the guys who are spending the money, you're going against somebody who can actually help you in terms of investment. When you're going against them with the quality that you're putting out on a Saturday, you've got to take some responsibility somewhere down the line. That's your team to a certain extent. Yes, I agree with the long-term strategy and the long-term plans that a manager shouldn't really get sacked unless he's had 3 windows. If you've got 3 transfer windows, you've got somewhere near your team entering the field of play, week in, week out, match in, match out. But he hasn't got that. He doesn't seem to have that cohesion on the field of play. He's brought in some players, and yes, okay, you can say he's been unlucky with 1 or 2 of the goal scorers that he brought in, or the frontline players that he's brought in with injury. And the support to Harry Kane hasn't been as forthcoming as what he wanted it to. Because I thought Richarlison was a good signing. I thought that was going to put Harry Kane under a lot more pressure, but it was also going to allow Spurs to maybe play 2 strikers up front. And they were forming a relationship together. I'm trying to think of the lads, the left foot on the right-hand side, I can't think of his name. Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Kulusevski and Song, yeah.
Yeah, so you've got enough potency on the front line for me to be somewhere near. And I said to a lot of fans on 606 when I was doing a show for the BBC that I fancied Spurs to finish in the top 2 this year. And at the start that they had, I was almost being justified by that comment, because I knew what kind of football they were playing. And now all of a sudden, to see them trailing 5-6 places behind Arsenal, I mean, that will be getting to the fans as well, and that will be getting to the players as well. So it's looking like a tumultuous kind of second half of the season for Spurs. But if they can get their strongest team out, I do think they can qualify for Europe if they get their strongest team out often enough.
And I suppose, Phil, just a quick word on Liverpool and Man United. Looks like Sabitzer is going to come in for Man United, a reaction to Eriksen's sort of injury. But Liverpool, I suppose, Klopp has looked at the market. Obviously, he's looked at the options, and many Liverpool fans is Klopp's going to do his business in the summer in terms of a rehaul. And obviously, the midfield department, people are saying it's crying out for sort of change. But Jurgen has probably looked at this market and probably said there's not value for money, and in terms of tearing it up and starting again roughly in terms of that midfield, it's probably too condensed to do it. He probably needs a whole summer to get it done in terms of changing it. So he's just said, not for me this January.
Points very well made. They brought Gakpo in, haven't they? Cody Gakpo. For me, you're looking at his statistics for a winger. He's obviously a Dutch winger, very technical. So, you're looking at a player that can handle the ball. Where Klopp's concerned, he needs that, of course. And you're looking at his goals. His goals return are something like a 1 in 3 for a wide player. It's quite good. But when that front line broke up, that front 3, I think that was the start of the end where Jurgen Klopp was concerned. And I do agree with what you're saying. He's probably given up with that statement of not bringing any transfers in the window. Not as many as what the Liverpool fans were probably expecting. That statement is saying, I've given up on this year. And I don't mean completely given up. You obviously, every week you're fighting for 3 points. And if you can get to the top 4 and you're 10th at this moment in time, it'll be a damn good return second half of the season. But I think it's almost an internal sign without saying it that we've given up on this season's title and we'll plan for next year's title by bringing in, as you've just made reference to, almost ripping it up and starting again and bringing 4 or 5 midfield players in, 2 or 3 defenders, whatever. He's probably going to flood it with 6 or 7 quality players in the summer, and that'll be costing you 350, 400 million.
And I suppose, Phil, time is nearly catching up on us now. Just want to touch on the relegation sort of battle. And I suppose Sean Dyche has come in a day and a half to sort of work on. And Everton fans were expecting movement, but you can't expect miracles either. And it's been a very frustrating day for Everton. It seems like every one of their signings, maybe other Premier League clubs had touted them for maybe 2 or 3 weeks in advance. And Everton are trying to maybe convince the player that has had his head turned for maybe the past 2 weeks by a previous started club in the terms of the Premier League. And it's not often you see Southampton beating Everton for the signatures of players.
It isn't that often, no, you're right. But again, I'll go back to the selfishness at times of players. You look at league tables, you look at the club, of course you do. Certain players are bound to be playing for certain clubs. And if you look at Everton's situation and you look at Southampton's situation and you see almost, I don't know, you're looking at two situations that both clubs could find themselves in the Championship next year. But for Everton to be outbidded or for players to be turning their back on Everton itself for another club that's below them in the Premier League is a bad sign. It's not a really good sign. Where Sean Dyche is concerned, I've got to say it, I've known Sean years. We used to go holidaying in Portugal. I've had many a conversation with Sean when he was a young coach at Watford. I mean, this guy, he couldn't miss this chance. This is a chance of managing a club, albeit second bottom in the Premier League, managing a club that should be somewhere near the top six. He hasn't had time to weave any kind of magic in the transfer window, but the guy's a motivator. And I think with the group that he's got, he'll certainly be putting teams out there that are not easy to play against and that are not easy to beat. And he'll be having a go for sure. And it wouldn't surprise me if Everton do have an upturn in form and Sean Dyche gets them out of the trouble that they're in. But it would have been nice in the last day and a half of the window for him to bring 2 or 3 of his players in so he could say at least somebody in the change room knows exactly what I want without having to sell himself on the training ground every day.
And Phil, finally, for the last 30 seconds, before I let you go, one player I'm sort of intrigued talked about of Hull City in your time. Tell me, JJ Okocha, that sort of business, the magician himself. How did that sort of come about? How did you manage to persuade JJ Okocha, a player who's played for Paris Saint-Germain, numerous players in time, to come to Hull City? Had he ever even heard of Hull, dare I say?
Yeah, no, he hadn't, Jim. He hadn't heard of Hull. And when I met the lad, we probably had 3 or 4 meetings in London. I kept him away from Hull for the time being. And when I met him, we put pen to paper in London. When I brought him to the ground, which was a nice ground, don't get me wrong, it's a decent ground. It was a bit like the Reebok Stadium, as it were, back in the day. You know, new stadium, new structure, built for international football, albeit under 21s. And when I brought him there, he was quite impressed by the stadium. But I walked into a press conference, and I honestly, Jim, I will not kid you, there was 44 camera crews in that meeting. And I was normally talking to one man and his dog. You know, on a weekend, you know, I'd have a conversation with the local press lads and there'd be one camera crew. 44 camera crews turned up when I was signing JJ Okocha. So the effect I wanted to have was certainly going to be on the field of play football-wise, but the exposure that Hull City received because of that was one of the reasons why we did succeed and why we did get promoted to the Premier League.
Yeah. And Phil, I suppose you're an armchair sort of fan, a sort of Premier, but you enjoy these sort of days. And tell me, do managers sort of enjoy them more when they're sort of looking on from lower leagues or not involved in clubs, or do you actually enjoy it when you're part of that club? And is it very, very stressful, as the saying goes, in terms of that day? Or do managers really, really like to be able to put their feet up on that sort of final day and say, yes, got the business done in the sort of 2 weeks? Or do some managers like that excitement of deadlines? Because Harry Redknapp seemed to love it. He seemed to love that sort of... He used to hold one back each window for that particular day, sort of such.
Just for the day, that's right.
Yeah.
I used to have Colin Todd at Bolton Wanderers first, and Colin wouldn't want to do any business on the last day of the season, wouldn't want to do any business. You know, he just switched his phone off and went back home after training had finished, whatever day it was. and he didn't like it. Whereas Sam Allardyce absolutely had everybody in the football club in his office for 24 hours, locked down. Everybody was on phones. Anybody knew anything about anybody, you'd have to phone them up and make sure that you could maybe maneuver and manipulate a deal on the day. If he didn't get a deal done, and he thought he was maybe going to get 2 or 3 in, if he didn't get a deal done, he was invariably a very, very angry man for 4 or 5 days until the game came around, and then he got back into that cycle of managing the team. But many a day, many an hour spent in a dingy office at Blackpool, at Bolton, at Hull City, at wherever, and you've got a training ground outside. The lights are going dark, and everybody's phone call, and you're trying to work the oracle. You're trying to work miracles to try and get some players in through the door. And then you've got the final one is to the chairman. Chairman, I've got this player, 5 million. He's going to cost us 5 million, 250 grand a week. It's like, it's crazy, man. It's crazy. But you need to tick so many boxes, Jim, on the final day. It becomes a very, very stressful day. And invariably, the next day, manager, you wouldn't see him on the training ground. You'd have the coaches would be taking a session. He'd be standing at the sideline because he's shattered, quite simply.
Phil Brown, on that note, an absolute pleasure joining us today live from India on transfer deadline day. Hopefully it's an exciting watch for you as it is for us here. Phil Brown, manager of Hull City, Bolton Wanderers, Derby County. Pleasure for joining us today, Phil. Take care, God bless, and hopefully speak to you again sometime in the near future.
Thanks for the invite. Cheers, Jim.
Take care.